My name is Olivia, and if you had seen me that day, standing in the glittering ballroom decorated with roses, fairy lights, and champagne glasses, you would have thought I was the happiest sister in the world. My younger sister, Isabella, had just walked down the aisle in her white gown, radiant and glowing, her hand linked with her new husband's. Cameras flashed, laughter filled the air, and applause echoed like music. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. But when my mom leaned toward me and whispered with a smile, "So, Olivia, when will it be your turn?" That was the exact moment my smile became a mask. I laughed softly, tilting my head like it didn't hurt, but deep inside, her words cut like a knife. My turn? She had no idea. She had no idea what I was hiding, or what I had endured in silence. I pressed my lips together, pretending I was fine. I even clapped harder for Isabella as she kissed her husband. But in my mind, I replayed everything. The betrayal, the humiliation, the secret that no one in that room knew. You see, this wasn't just another wedding. This was a stage where my pain was buried under layers of makeup and forced laughter. Behind my smile, there was a story that would make you gasp, a story of how my own sister had stolen not just love from me, but years of trust. And my mother? She never knew the role she played in breaking me. That day, as the music started and guests danced on the golden-lit floor, I quietly slipped away to the balcony. I needed fresh air, something to cool the fire burning inside me. I looked down at the city lights, sparkling like jewels beneath the night sky, and I asked myself a question. How did I get here? How did I let them all walk over me? The truth is, I had been trained to smile, to keep peace, to never raise my voice. Growing up, I was the dependable daughter, the one who sacrificed so Isabella could shine, the one who stayed quiet while Mom always compared me to her. Look at Isabella, she's prettier, more social. You should be more like her, Olivia. Those words haunted me for years. And every time Isabella took something I wanted, whether it was attention, opportunities, or affection, I swallowed it down like bitter medicine. But this was different. Because Isabella hadn't just taken another opportunity. She had taken the man I was supposed to marry. I know you're shocked. And believe me, I was too, the first time I found out. But at that wedding, no one knew. No one suspected that behind my calm, smiling face stood a woman whose heart had been ripped apart, whose dreams had been handed over to her own sister. And my revenge? Oh, it wasn't going to be loud or violent. It wasn't going to be some dramatic outburst in front of the crowd. No. My revenge was going to be quiet, patient, and devastating. Because while Isabella thought she had won, and while Mom thought I was just the older daughter who needed to hurry up and settle down, I had already started building my plan. A plan to show them both that you don't bury someone like me and expect me to stay underground. I took one deep breath, steadied myself, and returned to the ballroom. The night was young, and everyone was too busy celebrating to notice the storm I was hiding inside me. But someday soon they would notice. That night, I wasn't just Olivia, the forgotten sister. I became Olivia, the woman who was done being silent. And if you stay with me, I'll tell you everything. I'll tell you how it started, how it broke me, and how I built my revenge piece by piece. Because the wedding you just imagined? That was the beginning, not the end. If I told you my story began at the wedding, I'd be lying. The truth started years before, back when I was 25, hopeful and very much in love. His name was Daniel. Daniel wasn't just any man to me. He was the kind of man you only read about in romance novels. Tall, kind, gentle, with that smile that made my knees weak. We met at a bookstore cafe. I was in the corner, buried in a stack of novels, when he came over, holding the same book I was reading. It felt like fate, like the universe had stitched our paths together. I remember how he made me laugh when I least expected it, how he listened to my dreams without interrupting, and how he told me one night under the stars, "Olivia, I can see myself building a life with you." My heart soared that night. I thought I'd found the one. But fate, as I later learned, wasn't kind. Isabella had always been my opposite. Where I was quiet and thoughtful, she was loud, sparkling, and effortlessly charming. She walked into any room like she owned it, and people adored her for it. Growing up, she got the new dresses, the compliments, the freedom. And me? I was the shadow, the responsible one, the one mom leaned on but rarely praised. Daniel met Isabella a year into our relationship. I introduced them at my birthday dinner, thinking nothing of it. She hugged him too long, laughed too loudly at his jokes, and her hand brushed his arm more than once. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That's what sisters did. They teased. They flirted harmlessly. They didn't steal. Right? But I noticed things. Subtle things. Daniel suddenly mentioned Isabella more often. "Your sister's so funny," or "Isabella told me this story today." Then came the nights he was busy, only for me to find out he had been with her. I wanted to confront him, but I was raised to avoid conflict. Mom always told me, "Don't be dramatic, Olivia. You're too sensitive." So I buried it, just like I buried everything else. Until the day I couldn't anymore. It was a rainy Tuesday when I found out the truth. I stopped by Daniel's apartment to surprise him with dinner, only to find Isabella's scarf draped over his couch. And there they were, laughing together, like I was the intruder. I'll never forget the look on Daniel's face when he saw me, guilt dripping off him like the rain outside. He stammered. Isabella smirked. And me? I stood frozen, my chest hollow. "Olivia, it's not what it looks like," he started. But it was exactly what it looked like. That night, I drove home in silence. The streets blurred as tears poured down my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but when I walked in, Mom was waiting in the kitchen. I thought she'd comfort me. I thought she'd hold me. But instead, she sighed. "Olivia, maybe you should have been more exciting. Daniel needs someone like Isabella. Don't take it personally." Her words crushed me more than Daniel's betrayal. My own mother had sided with my sister, as though my heartbreak was a footnote in their story. Days turned into weeks, and the pain turned into a quiet numbness. Daniel officially left me for Isabella, and the world moved on as if nothing had happened. Mom didn't scold Isabella. Dad, always silent, kept out of it. And me? I became invisible. But invisibility has its benefits. When no one is watching you, they don't notice what you're planning. They don't see the way you start piecing together your strength. I remember sitting in my room one night, staring at the ceiling. The anger inside me had stopped burning. Instead, it had crystallized into something sharper, clearer. I wasn't going to be the victim in their story. I was going to write my own. That's when I started watching, listening, learning. Isabella thought Daniel was her prize, but I knew her too well. She was careless, selfish, and never satisfied with just one man's love. Daniel thought he'd found forever, but I knew his heart would eventually feel the cracks. And Mom? She thought I'd stay quiet forever. She thought I'd swallow my pain and fade away. But I wasn't that Olivia anymore. By the time the wedding invitations arrived, Isabella and Daniel scripted in gold letters. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I simply smiled, tucked the card into a drawer, and whispered to myself, "It's time." At the rehearsal dinner, when Daniel tried to meet my eyes, I smiled politely, as if nothing had ever happened. Isabella twirled around in her white dress, laughing loudly. Mom beamed at her, ignoring me like always. They thought I was weak. They thought I was defeated. But what they didn't know was that I had already laid the foundation of my revenge. Not with rage. Not with violence, but with patience. Because the sweetest revenge is never quick. It's slow, it's precise, and it leaves scars that never heal. So when Mom leaned in at the wedding and asked me, "When will it be your turn?" she didn't realize she was speaking to a woman who wasn't waiting anymore. My turn was coming, and it was closer than they could ever imagine. After the rehearsal dinner, I stopped pretending I was broken. I stopped accepting the pity glances, the awkward silences, the "I'm so sorry" Liv texts that never meant a thing. I had to be smarter than anger. Anger is loud and messy. It burns out. Strategy is quiet and relentless. I became strategic. First, I went small. I started collecting the things they thought didn't matter. Screenshots of Daniel's evasive texts, a playlist he'd made for Isabella that mentioned private jokes I recognized, the receipts for weekend trips that didn't include me. Little pieces of the life they were building together, but pieced together in a way that showed the pattern. They hadn't stumbled into each other. They had planned around me. The evidence didn't have to be explosive to be true. But evidence without story is just noise. So I began to build a narrative, my narrative, one that would make people see what I had seen but never been allowed to say. I started keeping a journal in which I wrote down dates, conversations, the way Daniel's tone shifted when Isabella walked into a room. I documented how Mom always laughed at Isabella's jokes and rolled her eyes at my suggestions. I wrote the little humiliations that, to everyone else, seemed normal. Those notes became the spine of what I was going to do. Isabella kept being Isabella, unaware, careless, laughing loudly in public, bragging about how she won Daniel. That was her weakness. She assumed no one would ever dig. She assumed the world would keep spinning in her favor. She didn't notice that every time she flexed, she exposed more of herself. She didn't notice that people saved her words or that her calls left traces. I played the part Mom taught me well, the quiet, reasonable daughter. I helped with the seating chart and the cake tasting, offering practical suggestions while listening to Isabella's dramatic plans. I smiled while she gossiped about coworkers and the men she'd dated for sport. I smiled while she told the same story of how she and Daniel met, embellishing details to make herself the heroine. I cataloged everything in my head like a librarian indexing rare books. Then I widened my circle. There were people who knew, friends of Daniel's who had been ignored, coworkers of Isabella who'd rolled their eyes at her arrogance, a bartender who remembered Daniel and Isabella slipping in late from a drive one night. I reached out to them quietly, one message at a time. I didn't ask for drama, I simply asked for facts. People love to be heard. Even more, they love to be useful. They gave me details I couldn't have found alone. The internet became my ally. Social media is a museum of overshared lives, and both Daniel and Isabella had been generous donors. Old posts, tagged photos, stories, they all told tales I could use. I found photos of Isabella in places she claimed she hadn't been, comments that contradicted her version of events, flippant remarks she made when she thought no one was listening. Daniel's accounts had cryptic messages that made sense when read beside Isabella's posts. Everything fit together like a jigsaw puzzle I'd been assembling in the dark. There were nights I felt like I was two people. By day, I ordered flowers for the wedding rehearsal, scripted reassuring texts to my father, and pretended I approved of their choices. By night, I became obsessive, turning over details, searching for patterns. It was exhausting, and sometimes I wondered if I was becoming the bitter sister people expected me to be. But then I reminded myself, I wasn't doing this for revenge alone. I was doing it to reclaim my dignity. I was doing it because being invisible had cost me years I would never get back. The first blow I dealt was small and surgical. Isabella loved her perfect image. She thrived on being seen as flawless, so I chose a place where that image mattered most, the wedding itself. A few days before the ceremony, I sent an anonymous tip to the bridal planner with a list of vendors who were operating unethically, vendors that, coincidentally, Isabella had insisted on using because they matched her aesthetic. The planner, who was proud of her reputation, began quietly swapping out vendors and investigating. Isabella noticed, of course, and assumed it was bad luck. No one suspected me. When I made the decision to go public with the truth, I didn't do it with fanfare. I wrote an honest letter to people who mattered, friends, family, and a handful of close acquaintances of Daniel's. It wasn't a long letter, it was precise. I outlined discrepancies, I attached screenshots and dates, and I included the statements of people who had witnessed things I hadn't. I didn't use inflammatory language. I didn't scream. I presented facts and let them speak for themselves. The reaction was immediate. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind you see in movies, but the subtle unraveling of trust. People began to ask questions. Friends who had once been on autopilot suddenly remembered conversations. The bartender I'd contacted texted me a heart and a short note. "I'll back you." A co-worker of Isabella's, who'd always admired her ability to charm, sent a long message confessing that Isabella had lied about a promotion she'd stolen from someone else. Little cracks widened. At first, Daniel tried to contain it. He messaged me, pleading, begging me to stop, saying we could talk. I ignored him. I had nothing to say. He abandoned me once. I wasn't going to give him the chance to twist my words again. Isabella called me a coward to my face one afternoon when she saw me at the florist, accusing me of trying to ruin her life. I listened. She couldn't understand that I wasn't trying to ruin anything. I was exposing it. Things escalated when Isabella found out that her wedding photographer had been quietly replaced a week before the ceremony because of licensing issues I'd unearthed and reported. She cried in front of Mom, calling the loss a disaster. Mom said, "It's okay, honey, we'll fix it." But the pillar of perfection Isabella had built cracked a little that day. People whispered. Guests who had once admired her now leaned in to hear more. Momentum shifted. This wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't about making someone suffer for the sake of spectacle. It was about balance. I wanted them to feel the weight of what they'd done, how casual cruelty can fracture lives. I wanted Mom to realize that her words and choices mattered. I wanted Daniel to know that leaving me for a thrill wasn't consequence-free. And as the wedding neared, my small acts of disruption compounded. Vendors balked. A bridesmaid considered stepping down after overhearing a truth about Isabella's past, and Daniel started to look tired. The same man who had once told me he wanted to build a life with me now looked like someone who'd been edited out of his own story. The conflict I'd started had a life of its own. It pulled people, secrets, and loyalties into it like a magnet. But the most dangerous thing about revenge is that it often wants to be more than justice. I had to keep reminding myself to stop where the wrong stopped. I wanted them to see me as I was, not a villain, not a martyr, but a woman who had been pushed aside and chose to stand up. The line between right and vindictive can blur when you're deep in it. And so far, I was still walking that line. The wedding day arrived with its bright lights and gilded promises. People were on the lookout for drama, eyes eager for spectacle. I walked into that ballroom carrying the weight of what I'd set in motion. I'd sown out, and the seeds had sprouted. Now I could only watch and wait to see how deep the roots would go, and whether the truth would finally take hold. The wedding day wasn't just a ceremony. It was a battlefield. And I had chosen my weapons carefully. Silence, truth, and timing. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, golden drapes, and tables set with roses and crystal. Guests in elegant gowns and tuxedos murmured with anticipation as the string quartet played softly in the background. To anyone watching, it was a flawless scene. But beneath that gloss, whispers buzzed. My letter, the evidence, the cracks, they had spread like wildfire. And now, everyone was watching Isabella and Daniel with cautious curiosity. I entered quietly, wearing a simple navy blue dress. Not too flashy, not too dull. I didn't want to compete with the bride. I didn't need to. My presence alone was enough to remind people of the story they now knew. When heads turned toward me, I felt their gazes linger just a little too long. They weren't looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking with suspicion, with questions they were too polite to ask. Isabella floated into the room on Daniel's arm, radiant in her gown. Her smile was wide, but I knew her well enough to see the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes darted nervously around. She had heard the whispers. She knew the tide was shifting, but she still clung to the belief that she could control the narrative. That was always her strength, control. But today, she didn't hold the strings. The ceremony began. The priest's voice echoed through the hall, words of love and commitment filling the air. I sat near the front, close enough to watch every flicker of emotion on their faces. Daniel's hands trembled as he held Isabella's. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. When it came time for the vows, Isabella spoke first. Her words were perfect, rehearsed, dripping with charm. Guests dabbed their eyes, nodding at her performance. And then it was Daniel's turn. He opened his mouth, but for a moment, just a moment, his voice caught. His eyes flicked to me, then quickly back to her. He stumbled over a line, and though he recovered, the hesitation was enough. A murmur rippled through the room. People noticed. Then came the moment that sealed everything. The priest asked if anyone objected. Traditionally, no one ever does. It's a formality. But this time, the silence was heavy, suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest. I didn't plan to speak. That wasn't my role. I had already done enough. But in the corner, a voice rose. It wasn't mine. A man in his mid-30s, someone I recognized as a coworker of Daniel's, stood up slowly. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. I don't mean to ruin anything, but doesn't anyone else find it strange? How quickly this all happened. How Olivia was in the picture not long ago. Gasps. Chairs creaked as people shifted. The priest looked startled. Isabella's eyes went wide, her perfect mask cracking. She opened her mouth, ready to lash out, but before she could, another voice chimed in from the back. It was the bartender I'd spoken to weeks ago. Yeah, I remember when they came in together, when Daniel was still with Olivia. I served them drinks. The room erupted into whispers, sharp and cutting like blades. Daniel's face drained of color. Isabella clutched his hand, her nails digging into his skin, trying to anchor him. But the damage was done. The story was no longer mine alone. It belonged to everyone in that room. Mom leaned forward in her seat, her face pale. For once, she didn't look proud of Isabella. For once, she didn't look dismissive of me. She looked afraid. The priest cleared his throat, trying to restore order, but the atmosphere was broken. Guests muttered, exchanged knowing glances. The fairy tale wedding had turned into a theater of truth, and the curtain had been yanked back. I stayed silent, sitting perfectly still, my expression calm. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to speak. The truth was louder than anything I could say. Isabella tried to continue, her voice sharp and brittle. This is ridiculous. People are jealous. Olivia is jealous. She spat my name like poison, but her words only made her sound defensive. Her laughter, usually effortless, now sounded hollow. Daniel looked at her, then at me. His lips parted, but no words came. His silence was louder than the accusations, louder than the protests. Because silence in that moment was admission. The ceremony stumbled forward, awkward and broken. They exchanged rings, but the magic was gone. The guests clapped politely, their applause thin and strained. And when Isabella and Daniel kissed, the sound of whispers drowned it out. Later, during the reception, I stood near the edge of the dance floor, watching as Isabella twirled in her gown, forcing herself to laugh, to appear unbothered. But I saw the way people avoided her eyes, the way conversations stopped when she approached. Daniel kept slipping away, his smile strained, his posture tense. The cracks I had opened were now fissures, spreading through their perfect facade. Mom came to me once, her face pale and tight. "Olivia, what did you do?" she whispered. I looked at her, my smile calm, controlled. "I didn't do anything, Mom. I just stopped staying quiet." Her lips parted, but no defense came. For the first time in my life, she had no lecture, no comparison, no dismissal. She simply walked away, her shoulders heavy. And me? I felt lighter. For years, I had been invisible. But now everyone saw me. They saw what had been done. They saw the cracks in the golden daughter's crown. The climax of revenge isn't always a bang. Sometimes it's the quiet collapse of lies under their own weight. And as the night dragged on, I realized something. I didn't need to destroy Isabella or Daniel. They were already unraveling. All I had to do was let the truth breathe. And the truth, once freed, is unstoppable. The wedding ended the way storms do, quietly, but with debris scattered everywhere. The music slowed, guests slipped out early, and the golden fairy lights that once seemed magical now felt harsh, exposing everything people had tried to hide. I sat at my table, sipping water, watching it all fall apart. Isabella laughed too loudly on the dance floor, dragging Daniel into photos he clearly didn't want to take. Mom fluttered around like a frantic bird, whispering to relatives, trying to glue together the fragments of a reputation she'd spent years polishing. But no one could unhear the whispers. No one could unsee the cracks. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the shadow, the afterthought. I felt steady, visible. My smile wasn't a mask anymore. It was real, calm, grounded. As the night wound down, I stepped outside. The cool air wrapped around me, and I let myself breathe deeply. My chest felt lighter, as though I had finally set down a weight I'd carried since childhood. The Olivia who had once swallowed pain to keep the peace was gone. In her place stood someone who had learned that silence can protect, but it can also imprison. Daniel came outside a few minutes later, his tie loosened, his face weary. He stopped when he saw me. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then he said, quietly, "Olivia, I'm sorry." I studied him. Once upon a time, those words would have broken me, would have tempted me to forgive, to hope. But now they meant nothing. Sorry doesn't undo choices, I replied softly. It doesn't erase betrayal. His shoulders sagged. He nodded, as though he had expected my answer. Without another word, he turned and walked back inside. That was the last real conversation I ever had with him. Isabella came out later, still in her gown, her face streaked with frustration and smudged mascara. She didn't even bother pretending with me. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "You couldn't just let me have this, could you?" I tilted my head, my voice calm. "You took what wasn't yours. All I did was stop covering for you." Her jaw clenched. For once, she didn't have a clever retort. She spun on her heel and stormed back inside. Watching her go, I felt no triumph, no gloating sense of victory. Just clarity. She had built her life on lies, and lies always collapse. I didn't have to push her. She would crumble on her own. When Mom finally approached me, she didn't scold or defend Isabella like I expected. Her face was tired, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "Olivia, I didn't realize." That single sentence broke something open in me. Not anger this time, but grief. Years of being unseen, unappreciated, dismissed. I could have screamed at her. I could have listed every slight, every wound. But I didn't. I simply said, "You never wanted to realize." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't comfort her. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because for once, I needed her to sit with the truth. The days after the wedding were quieter, but the aftermath rippled. Friends and relatives called me, not with pity this time, but with respect. They told me I was brave, that they finally understood what I'd been through. Some apologized for not noticing sooner. It didn't erase the past, but it mattered. As for Isabella and Daniel, their marriage started with fractures too deep to ignore. Within months, the tension showed. Daniel grew colder, distant. Isabella grew more desperate, trying to control the narrative, but the whispers followed them everywhere. By their first anniversary, they were separated. And though people pretended to be surprised, everyone saw it coming. I didn't celebrate their downfall. That wasn't my revenge. My revenge wasn't about watching them fail, it was about reclaiming myself. About showing that I was never the weak, invisible girl they believed me to be. I focused on myself after that. I poured my energy into work, into friendships that uplifted me, into passions I'd long buried because I was too busy pleasing everyone else. Slowly, I rebuilt, not from anger, but from strength. One evening, months later, I stood on the same balcony where I had once stared out at the city lights, burning with pain. This time, I looked out with peace. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who hid behind forced smiles, who accepted scraps of love, who stayed silent. I whispered to her, "You deserved better. You always did." And for the first time, I believed it. You see, revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is transformation, turning pain into power, silence into a voice, invisibility into presence. At my sister's wedding, when my mother leaned in and asked, "When will it be your turn?" I smiled because I already knew.
My turn wasn't about finding a man or standing at the altar. My turn was about standing tall, finally owning my worth, and no longer letting anyone decide who I was supposed to be. And that, right there, was my revenge. Sparkles, if Olivia's story touched your heart, then don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves emotional, powerful stories. And for more viral revenge stories that keep you hooked till the very end, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring you even more unforgettable stories.